Welcome to Heroic Media. I'm Patrick Cordova.
And I'm Michelle Bauman.
This week on Heroic Media, 24 MS patients in the UK are walking, running, and even dancing thanks to a new adult stem cell treatment.
The Supreme Court rules in favor of the religious liberty of the University of Notre Dame.
A new statute in Washington is making many pedestrians reconsider their approach to homeless persons.
Stay tuned for all of these stories and more here on Heroic Media. So here at Heroic Media, we discuss news headlines that deal with fundamental moral issues, mainly considering the issues of family, marriage, and life. And we focus on these topics because they're really fundamental to the rest of society.
That's right, and a lot of times our stories will be about abortion, euthanasia, embryonic stem cell research, human cloning, and homosexual marriage.
Exactly. So Patrick, what's our first story for today?
All right, in our first story, doctors in England are excited about a groundbreaking adult stem cell treatment, which has enabled a number of multiple sclerosis patients to have dramatic recoveries. So,
really incredible story.
Really incredible, because you think of MS and you go, oh, it's this incurable disease.
Right.
And so this was very shocking to me when I read this.
Absolutely.
I know a couple of people with MS, and so I'm not sure if they know about it. But yeah, the first thing that I thought was, wow, that's great. And just hearing the positive results that they had, it was very encouraging. And I guess that's what a lot of doctors are saying too. They're saying that it's very encouraging that people are experiencing this type of thing. But I think the first thing we should get off right off the bat is just to clarify that stem cell research, the Catholic Church doesn't look down upon it. It's totally fine. The problem that the Church has is with embryonic stem cell research, and the reason for that is because embryonic stem cell research destroys a human person, a human life. And so adult stem cells, on the opposite side, can be harvested safely from an adult, and also, so they're ethical.
Right.
And then a nice thing to note about them also is that adult stem cells have also produced all sorts of cures and treatments and things like that, whereas embryonic stem cells have not.
Exactly. There's over 100 different cures and treatments that have come from the adult stem cell version, which is the ethical kind. So that's wonderful.
Yep.
And MS, there are 2.5 million people in the world suffering from MS, no known cure. So this is huge. And of course, we're just in the very early stages, just an early trial study. But we're looking at a study of 24 patients from their 20s to their 50s, and they're harvesting the patient's own stem cells. So you can do that by getting stuff from their skin or from different parts of their bodies. It's not affecting them like it would kill an embryo, but it's just getting some of those stem cells. And then what they're doing is they're using chemotherapy to turn off the body's immune system, and then infusing those cells back into the body, and then the immune system is rebuilt over the next few months, and the results have just been astounding.
Yeah, exactly. And just like you said, they harvest those stem cells, and just along those lines with the chemotherapy, because when I was learning about this, I was like, wait, why is chemo involved? I didn't know that MS people had to have chemo, but this is part of the therapy. And so basically they just kill their immune system, right, to rebuild it from the ground up, because MS is like an autoimmune disorder, if I remember correctly, but it uses your own immune system to attack tissues and breaks it down. So a professor, Basil Sharak, a neurologist, had this to say about it. We have seen profound neurological improvements. This is not a treatment suitable for everybody, because it is very aggressive and patients need to be quite fit to withstand the effects of the chemotherapy. So that is one thing to note. And I thought that when I read it, I was like, wow, chemotherapy, that's pretty serious stuff. So you kind of have to be in good shape to be able to withstand it. But apparently the results that they've seen are just amazing. People have had some really great recoveries where they didn't have feeling before. Now they have feeling. Now they can move again. Now they can walk again.
Yeah, there was one person who was in a wheelchair and after just 3 weeks of treatment was able to stand and now says that they're able to dance.
Yep.
Previously in a wheelchair. And then there was another patient, Chris Button, age 30, when diagnosed with MS. He had lost sight in one eye. and he started regaining vision a few weeks after the transplant. Now he says his vision is 95% back to normal.
That's just amazing.
Of course, more studies need to be done, but this shows a lot of promise, and this really shows the ethical promise that comes with stem cells.
Yeah.
We don't need to be destroying human lives. It's immoral, and it doesn't work. This is where the promise is.
Exactly, I agree. And there was a wide range of people, too, from their 20s to their 50s in this study. So I thought that was interesting to note, too, because it works on a wide range of people, of age groups. And also another person, Sam Ramsey, 29-year-old, was the first UK patient. And this was 4 years ago. So this has been going on for a little while, so that's kind of interesting. But Sam had the following to say. I can remember a couple of weeks after the transplant, my sister went running around the room when my finger started to move again. So that was really exciting. And then went on to say, from there it has been a long, slow haul with lots of physiotherapy and exercises, but I am now walking around on crutches and I have almost got full strength back in my arms. I recently passed my driving test and I'm hoping to find a job. This treatment has given me my life back.
Wow.
So I think that's just awesome. And that's the great, like you said, the great type of thing from these ethical stem cell research. It's just great when you see things like this happen.
Absolutely. And it shows you that the church and science don't contradict. They don't have to be in conflict with each other.
Exactly. Absolutely.
In our next story, in a potentially far-reaching decision, the Supreme Court has ordered that the University of Notre Dame's lawsuit against the HHS mandate be reconsidered.
So this is a big win.
It is, and it's sort of preliminary, but just to give a little bit of background for our viewers, we have this HHS mandate that basically the government under the healthcare law said employers have to provide health insurance for employees that includes free contraception, sterilizations, and some drugs that can cause early abortions.
Yes.
And so there was this huge host of lawsuits, hundreds of plaintiffs saying this violates our religious convictions, and then slowly the government introduced some revisions and some accommodations, but a lot of the plaintiffs said we're still being forced to cooperate in a way that we find immoral.
Yes.
We have to basically sign a document that gives someone else permission to introduce these immoral things.
Right.
And so we're still cooperating in a way that we find to be unacceptable. So
yeah.
Notre Dame is a big, very prominent Catholic university.
Yes.
For better or for worse, there have been controversies over some of the decisions they've made,
yes.
but they were among the people who filed the lawsuit, so that was very important.
Right.
And initially they had asked for an injunction to protect them from the lawsuit while it worked its way through the courts, and it was denied. But then a court of appeals upheld that denial, and they went to the Supreme Court. So basically what's happening here is very complex. But the court is saying to the lower court, go back and reconsider this in light of other religious freedom rulings that upheld religious liberty.
Such as Hobby Lobby, right? So last summer, there was a ruling that was in favor of Hobby Lobby, right? And it says something to the verbiage of closely held corporations don't have to abide by this HHS mandate. So the only thing that scares me is the whole closely held thing. But I guess because that could be held for up for interpretation. But it worked. It was great for Hobby Lobby, and they won, right? And so Notre Dame was basically just saying, hey guys, in light of what happened with Hobby Lobby, what do you think? And they said, yeah, kick it back. They need to reconsider.
Right, exactly. So this isn't a definitive ruling, but the court is telling the lower court, okay, reconsider this, keeping this in mind. So people are the people observing this are saying this is a very good sign for religious freedom. It gives us an indication, perhaps, into the way that the court is thinking. That the court is saying, wait a second, religious freedom needs to be applied more broadly. That even though that ruling was specifically for closely held corporations, the court is indicating that that might be able to spread beyond that to universities and other nonprofits. So it's a very hopeful ruling.
Yeah, and this whole thing, the HHS mandate, I read something on the internet. It wasn't like religiously associated with like the Catholic Church or anything like that, but it was just something, I think it was a secular piece, but it was like, we're still talking about the HHS mandate, ? And that's kind of how I feel about it. I'm like, man, this thing has really been dragging out.
For years now.
But it's been a long fight, and I'm glad to see that people, businesses and organizations and churches, from the second that it came out, they were opposed to it and banded together. Even states, right, came together and said, "Hey, we're going to fight this, and we're going to sue the government." So I think it's good. That's one thing that we can do as Catholics and Christians is make sure that we stand up for our values in society.
Absolutely.
Because we need to oppose these things because we have a voice too. We have a right. It doesn't matter if it's religiously backed or not. We have to stand up and say what we believe for society, right? And so
that's a really good point. And most of the cases so far have received favorable rulings.
Right.
So out of those 300 plaintiffs, the majority of them, at least initially, have gotten a good ruling. Some of them, it's still being, the cases are being worked through. It takes a really long time to get through. Things like that. But just that should give us hope that this isn't a hopeless case,
Yes.
that we have seen the victories in Hobby Lobby, we have seen the victories at some of the lower court levels.
Yes.
And so this is worth standing up and fighting for, that we are seeing positive outcomes, and we need to, I think it's good to pay attention to these cases so that people are aware of them, because I think from the narrative you get sometimes in the media, it's just sort of suggesting, oh, who believes in religious freedom anymore? Like nobody, the courts have ruled on that, that's not a thing anymore. So I think it's really good to note these cases and to help make sure that they're publicized.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very good. And I don't recall seeing this particular thing on the headlines, but I mean, it could have been. I might not have been watching, but at the beginning, it seemed like things were very at the forefront, and there was a lot of talk about this. But now that it's drug out for so long, that people are kind of like, just like, that's old news. But yeah, you do get that attitude, like kind of like you were saying earlier, where people are just like, oh, people still believe, religious opinions. No, everybody, free birth control for everybody. And that was the whole problem with this HHS mandate. It wasn't about, any sort of freedom. It was basically about forcing people that didn't want to cooperate in evil to cooperate in evil. So that's why there was such a huge uproar about this, because some people might go, well, what was the big deal, But it really was a big deal. And it's those kind of smaller, so to speak, steps that kind of force you to buy into, immoral acts that really wear down on society and break it down as a whole.
Exactly. In this case in particular, the lower court's ruling against Notre Dame had been used by the government to try to push this mandate on groups like the Little Sisters of the Poor and some of those other nonprofits. So that's why it really could have a very far-reaching consequences depending on what happens next.
Yep, exactly.
So we'll keep an eye on it.
All right.
Coming up after the break, we'll talk about a new statue in Washington, D.C. showing homeless Jesus.
Stay tuned.
Welcome back to Heroic Media. In case you're just joining us, I'm Michelle Bauman.
And I'm Patrick Cordova.
In our next story, would you recognize homeless Jesus on a park bench? That's the question for residents of Washington, D.C., where a new statue has been placed outside Catholic Charities building.
Interesting.
Very interesting. So what this is, it's a life-size statue, and it's just a blanketed figure on a park bench laying there. And so initially you walk by and you might just sort of think, oh, it's a homeless person. But then, oh, wait, it's a statue. And only when you get close do you realize, you see the wounds in the feet.
Oh, wow.
They're sort of sticking out of the blanket, and you're like, oh, this is Christ.
That's cool.
So really fascinating. Cardinal Wuerl of Washington, D.C. had seen a model of this statue in Rome that Pope Francis was blessing, and his spokesperson had suggested it to Catholic Charities of D.C. They put it in. Really interesting stuff.
That is.
So I actually had the opportunity to speak with Adam Ureneck, who is the Homeless Task Force Director for Christ in the City in Denver. He had some very insightful comments. Adam, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure.
What did you think about when you first heard about or read about this statue?
I was grateful, actually. I think that it's a great step towards recognizing that probably what we already know, that that Jesus is present in those who are homeless and those who are the least of ours.
Mm-hmm. The head of DC Catholic Charities said that he hopes this statue will help people recognize that they encounter Christ when they encounter their needy brothers and sisters. Do you find that that's true?
I think it is true, and I think that has a little bit to do with the statue itself, which is, I mean, for those who haven't seen the statue, when you first see it, you don't necessarily know that it's Jesus. In fact, you just think, okay, what is this strange statue of a homeless person sitting on a bench? But it's only when you go close to him that you realize that he has the wounds of the passion on his hands and on his feet. And so I think that there's a certain shock value that has, and also causes you to question, okay, probably my first reaction to this strange statue, and then realizing, wow, this is Jesus. So I think that it is a great idea, and I think that the way that it's proposed has been really good too. So I think it will have a very interesting effect on the people who see it, and also probably on the way that they treat the homeless.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. Now, the reaction to this statue has been largely positive. In particular, there are some homeless people who say that this is their favorite statue in the city, and this is Washington, D.C., so we've got a lot of really impressive statues and memorials. What is your response to that?
It makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense. I think that people identify what is close to them, or they feel close to what is close to them. So there's a really interesting example of, the name is escaping me right now, but it was actually one of the favorite crosses of Pope Benedict. And it was an altar, a painting that they put in the front of an altar. And when you got close to this painting of the crucifixion, you saw that Jesus himself is, this is the normal crucifixion, but you get closer, you realize that he has these kind of sores on his flesh, and it's also his hands are kind of contorted and what have you. And the interesting thing about that is that painting was actually painted during the era when there was the bubonic plague. And that the place where they had that altar was in fact a place where they used to take care of those people. And so people felt very, very close. And we imagine people very, very, very close to that Jesus, because Jesus, he takes on the suffering of the world, but when you actually see that he in fact is taking on your particular suffering, I think it has a tremendous impact on the people who see that.
Wow. Can you tell us a little bit about Christ in the City and the work that they do?
Sure. I mean, we're trying to do just that. We're trying to give people a new look at the homeless and a new look at the poor. I think we all in some ways fall victim to being routine in our way that we approach anybody, and especially the homeless. It's difficult. And so what we're trying to do is give people the opportunity to reach out to those in need through street ministry. We have missionaries who spend a year with us, and we give them formation in order to be able to do that. So we help them out with housing, we help them out with getting substance free, we help them getting work, and of course reconciliation with God. But we also have smaller experiences for, we have alternative breaks come in with high school groups and college groups that come in with us. And we also have a number of volunteers that come in and work with us each month in what we call our second Saturday. And there we offer about, food for about 300 people, and people can serve on alongside of us and then get that new look and in a sense see people who in fact are invisible or seem invisible to the rest of them.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the street ministry? What does that entail?
Street ministry, so it's just that. We go out onto the street every single day and we meet people where they're at. So under bridges, on the side of a river, on a park bench, and we just approach them and we say, hey, we would love to sit down and have a conversation with you if you're willing. We introduce ourselves, and we have a whole protocol that goes along with that. And we engage people in a personal relationship, and you kind of see where it goes. And we have our missionaries always have in mind those 4 goals that I mentioned to you. So we're always trying to get people dignified work. We're always trying to get them into housing. We're always trying to get them to be substance free, and we're always trying to have them reconcile with God. But a lot of times, a lot of these folks have been through a number of other programs, and that process doesn't necessarily happen instantaneously, and a lot of times there's a lot of failure involved. So what we really stress with our missionaries in the street ministry is that they meet people once and again, and they're very consistent. And that over time, maybe it's not necessarily that suddenly they realize they need housing, but really they realize that they're valuable, and that in order to be able to live up to that dignity, they're going to need work, they're going to need a house, they're going to give the drugs that they have. And so that process can take weeks, that process can take months, that process can take years.
Interesting. That's very fascinating. And I think it really challenges us in the way that we see homeless people, and the way that, are they viewing themselves with dignity? What have they been through? They're a person, not just, an image on the side of the road.
Absolutely.
What do you find are the greatest needs of the homeless people that you encounter? Is it material, physical needs, or is there something else that is really a deeper need there?
Well, it's really not an either or. That's one of the beautiful things about the Catholic faith. We're really kind of an and religion. And so it's material needs and the spiritual needs. And oftentimes what happens is that we kind of accentuate one or the other because it's hard to do both. And so, like I said, with those 4 indicators, we're trying to meet both of those needs. So, if you're saying something, pray to God, and, you need to be reconciled with God, but, they're living in the dirt, that's not right. But at the same time, if somebody gets housing and they're substance free and what have you, and they live an immoral life, that's also not good. We want people to be to aspire and do something greater in their lives as well. So it's kind of an and approach. But I would say that if we were to have an emphasis in the United States, or at least in Denver, what I've seen is that there are a tremendous amount of good agencies that exist, and they're doing wonderful things. But maybe one of the things I see that's missing is that personal touch and the personal accompaniment piece, that's showing that I'm here with you, and I love you. And that really kind of puts the person above the program. So I don't know if that's the most pressing thing in the whole United States, but at least I see in the work that we do in Christ in the City, that's what we really try to emphasize.
And that's so important. We see Pope Francis talk about that again and again, just accompanying and encountering people on that personal level.
Absolutely.
One last question. The Missionaries for Christ in the City, they go out to help and to serve these people in need. Do the missionaries ever find that they're being helped or served in ways that they didn't expect? Are they ever changed by the experience?
Absolutely, and that's one of the beauties of the program is that it's a program to serve the poor, but it's also a missionary formation program. And so it's hard to serve in the abstract. You know, maybe it's actually easy to serve in the abstract and hard to serve truly. Because, you know, what happens is that we have an idea, we see Mother Teresa and she's picking up people and we all love her and she has these beautiful quotes we've seen on the internet and what have you. And then you realize that working with those who are in need, or just working with people in general, is complicated, it's messy. Oftentimes people are ungrateful, oftentimes people are, disappoint you. And I think that experience is beautiful because it really shows that, you know what, it's more about the person than it is about you. And that other-centered approach is good for anybody, any human being. And you're really able to rescue that in Catholicism and saying, okay, you know, you really can't become a human being truly unless you've given yourself to the other. And so that process, what happens is that the person begins to convert over the course of the year. And so the missionaries we see at the beginning of the year are different people by the end. And it's exciting to see that they're going to go on to bigger and better things afterwards.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Well, Adam, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Wow, that's a really great conversation that you guys had. I really like that idea of that statue. That's just so cool.
Yeah.
And on the bottom of the screen, please check out the website for Christ in the City, where you can get more information, find out more about the organization and how they help out the homeless.
We'll have one more story after the break.
Stay tuned. Welcome back to Heroic Media. In our final story, New York Times op-ed columnist David Brooks's recent article titled "The Cost of Relativism" highlights the importance that family and morals have on society. So this was a kind of unexpected article, I guess, from my point of view, being on the New York Times and everything. But it was quite complex, but kind of took things a roundabout way, talking about different studies and books and things that have been out. But really, the whole he kind of tied it together at the end, I felt. And really what he was trying to say is just how important the family is and how society basically not having a moral compass, which is really relativism, right? The dictatorship of relativism that's so rampant today has really shaped society. And it was really interesting. There was a lot of different topics that he hit on demographics and things like that, and I found interesting. What did you think?
Yeah, it was really interesting. He's commenting on a new book that's studying the lower educational and economic class and saying, look at all these problems that we see as far as abusive parents, divorce, single parent households, violence, drug addictions, prison, out of wedlock pregnancies. And then he's saying, look, our response to this should be sympathy, but it's not just that. He says this, but it's increasingly clear that sympathy is not enough. It's not only money and better policy that are missing in these circles, it's norms.
Yes.
The health of society is primarily determined by the habits and virtues of its citizens. So what he's arguing is that there's this sort of moral norms that people just agree to. Certain things are right, certain things are wrong, and that we've lost that in America.
Right.
And basically the lower classes suffer more because they can't afford the mistakes. He's basically saying it's not like the upper class is this beacon of virtue in society, but they can afford to make some of these mistakes, whereas the lower class can't. And so it's harming everybody. And he's saying the solution to this is not necessarily just policies or money. It's having these societal norms that say some things are okay, some things aren't.
Yeah, and he said we kind of got into that whole situation by this plague of non-judgmentalism, basically.
Exactly.
Where we refuse to make a statement like, this way of living is better than this way. Or this is what you should do and this is what you should not do. Because, whoa, we don't want to be too judgmental, right? Whoa, you're judging me, right? There seems to be this whole big thing about being judgmental. And I feel like originally it was almost like it was tied into the Bible, like where people misquoted different things about judging others and what that actually meant. But it kind of got secularized, and then it was just hey, don't judge me about anything. Don't whatever you want to do, for you, whatever, that's fine. It's true.
Right.
Whatever I want to
Right.
do, it's fine. It's true. It doesn't matter what you think about me or what I think. It's just, you kind of live in this own bubble where you're in your own world, and whatever you think is true, and whatever you think is true, right?
Right.
So,
and even if they contradict. And we talked
Yes.
about this a couple weeks ago when we discussed the children being taught the difference between
Right.
fact and opinion, and really struggling with the
Yes.
idea that there is actually objective truth out there in the realm of morals. And when we have people who are unwilling to condemn ISIS and who are not willing to make the leap and say that is definitively and objectively wrong because they don't want to be judgmental, that's a problem.
Yes.
And so I think this really ties into it very much. And he's saying that we have to get back to that.
Yeah.
He says, in many parts of America, there are no minimally agreed upon standards for what it means to be a father. There are no
Yes.
basic codes and rules woven into daily life, which people can absorb unconsciously, and follow automatically. I think that's a really good description of what
Yes.
he's talking about, these social norms.
Yeah, absolutely. And the social norms are the key. And I thought that was interesting because this last weekend I was having breakfast with my grandpa and grandma, and they kind of mentioned something about that. And it was one of the things that he mentioned too. And it really just, so there were some things that he was talking about, right? High school educated parents. And he said that they dine with their kids less, they read to them less, they talk to them less, they take them to church less, encourage them less, spend less time engaging in development and activity. And it just reminded me of like what my grandparents were saying. My grandma this last week was like, yeah, people don't just sit down and have dinner with each other like we're doing, when we were having breakfast. But she's like, they don't sit down at the table and have a family meal, And so I think that is really important. And obviously spending time with your kids and reading to them and talking to them, and you see like Nanny 911 or whatever those shows are called, Super Nanny on TV, and you can tell that the parents don't, in a lot of situations, don't sit down and just talk with their kids. And when they are and they're sitting there reading them a book, their kids are just like watching their mouth, like, oh my gosh, like learning so much, and like, that one-on-one interaction with your children and with your family is so core to society as well, and just helping shape society. And along with that goes those values and morals that you teach them.
Yeah, and what David Brooks is arguing here, I think, is that we aren't going to have social repair until we have these moral norms, and that we can speak the same language. We have the same moral, he talks about a moral vocabulary.
Yep.
And he says that the good news is that there are examples throughout history where this moral revival has happened. He gives the example of a little bit in the 30s after the Roaring
1830s in England.
And the 1830s in England.
Yep, exactly.
And so he says that the way that this happens, it happens through organic communal effort with voices from everywhere saying gently, this we praise, this we don't. And
Exactly.
so I think that's really hopeful that it's not just saying, hey, our society is horrible, this is really hopeless, but he's saying this can happen if enough voices speak up.
Right.
And maybe it starts with something so extreme like ISIS that everyone can kind of agree that this is wrong.
Yeah.
And then just build from there. There are some things that are wrong and there are some things that are right, and we can distinguish between the two.
Exactly. And it kind of seems like throughout history, to me at least, that there's always been some sort of spark like that where something crazy happens and then people have to come together and build off of that and kind of rebuild. And I almost feel like we're getting close to that, like you mentioned ISIS, and there's just the complete disintegration of society today. It seems like things are rapidly falling apart. But yeah, I guess I'll end with David Brooks's quote. He said, every parent loves his or her children, everybody struggles, but we need ideals and standards to guide the way. And I think that really sums it up well.
I think so.
All right, that's it for this week on Heroic Media. Please join us next week for all the up-to-date news on the pro-life issues that matter to you.
Please feel free to write to us with any comments, questions, or news tips at news@heroicmedia.org.
And please visit our website at heroicmedianews.org, where you can check out more stories like the ones we discussed on this episode.
That's it for this week. Until next time, keep us in your prayers.
God bless.